Your luck.
Actually, Anya's instructions were to turn on the Zoom. Is it on? Or-
It was on right now.
So if he shows up, we get him?
Yeah, we'll show up.
All right.
Okay, all
Sorry about
right.
that. For the tape? Okay.
So who might show up?
Another candidate?
Okay.
I believe he said he was canceling, but she still wanted us to leave the Zoom open for some reason, our scheduler.
Why would that? Is it not cool to show up at Willamette Week if
I don't know.
you're in a Republican primary?
I don't know. We mentioned earlier, there's a lot of polarization out there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We don't bite.
I haven't been yet.
Generally, we
I don't think you bite.
No. Well, there have been times.
And I am double checking my phone is off, and I bet you already have done that.
Yeah, it's okay. Good.
So can you start in the traditional, have you been in for these endorsements?
No.
Oh, wow.
My district was just outside, you know,
okay.
and I think everybody to the north of me had been in, but you know, I just went up to TV Highway in Hillsborough, so it wasn't
Fair
quite
enough.
enough to get in.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So the way we usually start is having you introduce yourself,
Mhm.
your name and a brief bio, and the office you're running for, and a description of the district. Would you?
Sure.
Can we get
Start
your
us
age
off?
first? Just
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I forgot to write. Anyway, long story. Go ahead. That's why I'm
Ancient.
focused on it. What?
Ancient. No, I'm 62.
Okay.
I'm 56.
Just a youngster. There's some ages I wouldn't want to go back to.
I got a few of
It's
those.
like I don't want to live through that one.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
So, yeah, my name is Ron Noble. I am running for Congressional District 6, which is, couch this, it's been my home for 47 years. So CD6 is all of Polk County, all of Yamhill County, and then most all of Salem. Essentially, it goes down to Jefferson, Almsville, Turner, and Salem, then comes up the I-5 corridor. And then, so you've got Sherwood, Tualatin, Tigard, Woodburn, Wilsonville, and just pretty much around Washington Square, Raleigh Hills, and then it heads back, you know, that's the district. And my background, we moved to Oregon, my parents moved us to Oregon just before high school. So I went to high school in CD6. I worked just outside of CD6 for 20 years in Corvallis and Benton County as a police officer, and worked my way up to lieutenant, was a captain for a little while, and then took the job as police chief in McMinnville. Lived in Salem after I got married. My wife is from Beaverton. My in-laws lived in Raleigh Hills, well, until just recently. And so it's all home to me. And I've watched this whole corridor of ag and Polk and Yamhill County, and kind of the I-5 corridor, which is a lot of manufacturing and high tech, and watched it grow. In the changes between what goes on in Falls City, you know, in Polk County versus Tualatin or even, you know, the Raleigh Hills area, and how that's all the dynamic. So it just seemed like a natural for me after a career in law enforcement and my third term in the state legislature, that this is a district that I poured my life into. All except one of my children all still live in CD6 and my grandchildren. So it's really a family thing in the valley for me.
What percentage of the district have you already represented?
Well, I've all of the Yamhill County, well, not all of it, northern Yamhill County, and then haven't represented Sherwood. So there's just this side of Roy Rogers is kind of where the line is, and I was on the other side of Roy Rogers. So I was, you know, up Hillsborough High School area, which is not in CD6, but you know, there's still the ag and the high tech and transportation issues out in Washington County. They're all the same. Whether they're on the western Washington County or eastern Washington County, there's still a lot of transportation issues.
I guess it occurs to me to, before I forget, to ask you about what's going on the Democratic primary. I don't know if you're tracking this, but what do you make of the fact that a cryptocurrency investor, the richest guy in cryptocurrency, is spending a lot of money through a PAC he supports to influence the Democratic primary, and that the leading fundraiser on the Democratic side is getting most of his money from out of state. What does that look like from your perspective?
I think the people are going to weigh in.
Is it just like popcorn for you? A movie
in
show?
a way.
Like a slow pitch over the...
From a strategic standpoint, the more Democrats want to spend money on each other, the better. That's less for the general. I mean, that's the reality. Although there is money out there. I mean, in CD6 is a tier 1 race right now. Both the DNC and the RNC have declared it as a pretty high profile race. There's always this stuff that goes on. My view, at some point, and I can do this in the Republican primary or do this in the general election, we're on the same team. This is about Oregon, and we all bring something different to the table. And some people are going to have different resources, right or wrong, whether they're in state or out of state. My personal thought is I hope somebody isn't successful at just trying to buy the election on either side, either primary. And it seems to me that even though the stakes are really national, they're more focused. I mean, really what's important is representing Oregon. And so you would think Oregonians should be weighing in more than outside interests. But politics today, that's not always the case. Outsiders just do weigh in. I've seen numbers.
Do we have somebody on the...
Yeah, why don't you finish this answer and then I'll return.
I've seen numbers of how much out of state versus in state with this one particular candidate, and that seems a little bit extreme. It's.
Do you own a lot of Bitcoin?
I don't own any Bitcoin.
All right.
But I'm getting educated in Bitcoin.
Fair enough.
To know what the issues are.
Let's see who this is.
There's a lot of issues.
Yeah.
Hi there. Are you joining us for the CD6 endorsement interview?
Yes.
Okay, can you turn your camera on if you would? Hello.
Hi.
You've joined us a little bit in progress. We're here with Representative Noble, and he's on the other side of the table. I'm Rachel Monahan, and this is my colleague.
Anthony, how are you?
Hi. How are you?
So I'm going to hit record on this, and we can... so this is just by way of introduction, this is an endorsement interview. If you would, if you're not on your phone, silence your phone, and we ask questions to make a determination on our endorsement. We encourage respectful back and forth, but unlike a debate, we don't necessarily ask the same questions of each candidate or give equal time because we're trying to drill down on a decision. So with that, I will start the record.
Recording in progress.
All right. Would you introduce yourself? Give us a brief bio with why you're running for this office.
Absolutely. So my name is Angela Cloudhead. I am a clinical psychologist. I started my career as an intelligence analyst in the Air Force, and then I got my doctorate in clinical psychology. I worked in VA for about 12 years in various capacities in multiple VAs. And then I left VA, opened a private practice, and have been a small business owner since about 2014. I have a small group practice at this point where we see patients in their homes. I established the practice that way because I'm a geropsychologist. I was one of the first psychologists within the VA to work in home-based primary care. I felt it was an important model to reach people that had difficulty getting services in other means. And so I've been an advocate for seniors and people with disabilities since 2014, lobbying at the legislature, as well as working on community boards at the county levels, doing policy and budgeting types of work. I am also a contractor with a number of different court services, and so or municipal courts, and where I do evaluations, and so I am in and out of law every day because of that.
Why are you running for the Republican nomination for Congress?
Yeah, so the reason I'm running is because as an analyst in the Air Force, I got to see what various forms of government look like, and I got to see especially what happens to the people when Marxist types of ideas get incorporated in various governments. And when we got to see what happened during the pandemic with the lockdowns and the mandates and the food shortages and all of those kinds of things, it was very disturbing to me that I was seeing some of those same principles be enacted on American people. And so my primary reasons for running are to preserve freedom for future generations.
Wait, did Marx talk about lockdowns and quarantines? I thought his was mostly an economic model.
So what I got to see were things like when people started to have ideas that differed from their government agencies that were in charge of them, and how the government would suppress those ideas. And
right. I think you're talking about authoritarianism, right?
So certainly, but at the basis of a lot of and really what I'm talking about is communism, and the countries that were my target countries were either totalitarian or communistic in nature. And so, but at the basis of a lot of those are the ideas of Marxism that have been promoted by some of our elected leaders. And so things, and how I feel like how we ensure that our Constitution is preserved are through things like freedom of speech.
So, let's stick with you for the next question for a minute. What's your priority if elected?
My priority, if elected, is to, number one, ensure, like I said, our constitutional freedoms are preserved, to ensure that our children receive academic excellence in their education. I come from a background of extreme poverty, and so how I was able to rise from that as a biracial woman is by having education. And so having good education, and the failures of our current academic system in this state have really prompted a lot of concern for me as a person of color, that our children are not being educated sufficiently to compete on the national or the international scale.
So is there a specific action you would take as a member of Congress on either of those two priorities that you mentioned? Can you mention one specific thing you would do as a member of Congress? Yeah,
so one thing I would do is tie federal funds that go to schools to not necessarily what they can teach, but what they can't teach.
And
so things like CRT, which I feel as a biracial Black woman, I feel like it's racist, and I feel like it encourages segregation, which we already have in our school system. I know I have experienced that myself with my own children. We were in a brand new neighborhood, but it was built amongst an older neighborhood. And so what I've seen here in the Salem area, and I know it happens in other school systems here around Oregon as well, are that the children that have lower SES are from lower SES neighborhoods are funneled into one school, where the children that are from more affluent areas are funneled into a different school. So, for example, my son, when we pulled him out of that school, had a student to teacher ratio of 36 to 1, where the school that was literally half a mile away from us that we could see from our house, that we were denied an in-district transfer to, had a student-to-teacher ratio of 24-1.
What does that-
Okay, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
Could you, would you answer the same question, Representative? What would be your priority if elected to Congress?
So I think there's several priorities. One, we need to figure out what our role is around the world. We're in a place where we haven't, I think we have opportunities to take care of our house better. Whatever anybody thinks about what's going on with immigration, we have a crisis down at the border. And we need to secure the border, ensure that people aren't dying, that we're not bringing drugs in, and people aren't being trafficked. So there's some work in immigration in general, and it's not just one particular thing will fix it, but we need to take a look at what we've been doing for decades and figure out a way for that to happen. And that's based on my daughter's experience going overseas, falling in love with somebody from another country, getting married, and then watching him immigrate to the United States. And he's a teacher now in McMinnville, and I've got a grandson. He's from Dublin, Ireland, and I can't help but think, because I've worked in different areas, if my daughter had fallen in love with somebody from Mexico City, would I see my grandson today? So there's inequities, and I know it's a big issue, it's a hot topic, but we need to fix this. We need to figure out a way that it works and what our role is around the world.
So are you talking in careful terms about some kind of immigration reform there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I don't have an answer. I just know that the problem slapped me in the face while I was watching that. And I've had people that I've worked with trying to, where he's, they were both brought over as children. He's naturalized, she's not. And then how that marriage works and what type of work after about 15 years, $20,000 of investment to be able to get her just a green card to be able to then go back home to visit his family. So there's a bunch of inequity, and I don't know, I don't have the answer, but I know that we need to address it. We need to address education. We're torn apart right now. We have a public school system that we still can't quite hit the mark, and I know we've invested a lot of money. You know, this last one, some were fighting for $9.6 billion in the state school system. We ended up with $9.3 billion, and we're still falling short. And if anything, the pandemic has showed us the need for parents to stay involved. And they need to be involved whether it's public school, private school, homeschool, or charter school. Parents need to be involved. And each parent has a different capacity, either because of work or money or just their own ability to be part of that. So we need all of those systems to be robust. And I've got 5 children. We have used public school with every one of them. We've also homeschooled. We've also used private school for a couple. I've got a 10-year-old adopted son who needed a private school during the pandemic because remote learning was not going to work for an 8-year-old who'd been in foster care for 5 years of his 8 years of life. So he needed some consistency with teacher and interaction with people. So we chose public or private school, and we were able to do that. Not everybody was able to do that. So we need to encourage children to be curious, innovative. They need to be inquisitive, and we need to teach them how to be critical thinkers. Otherwise, society, generations from now, will be no different than what we are. They'll be fighting the same problems, and let them then figure out what life looks like going forward.
So is there a specific policy idea?
So the federal role needs to provide support to the states, not control it. And this is probably the Republican part of this, they need to kind of keep their hands off, provide support where states need help. But this is really a community and a state issue. Different communities, what education looks like in Northeast Portland, and there's some needs there, is different than Baker City.
So
because everybody's got a different set of experiences, and I mean, the quality of education shouldn't be different, but the needs of who you're educating are going to be different.
So, I mean, in the most sort of radical terms, like some of your Republican colleagues who are running for federal office have sat before us and argued that we should get rid of the U.S. Department of Education. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that that's what you're arguing, but I'm saying what do you mean? Are you saying there needs to be a change of the federal government backing away from dictating things to the states? And if so, what kinds of things are they dictating now that they shouldn't be? Like, just give me a sense of your thinking on that.
I think if there's any type of push from the federal government, it needs to be related to those things that we have accepted within the Constitution that the federal government has a role in, from interstate commerce. But if you look at freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, due process, search and seizure, those are all issues that rightfully have been determined not to be states' rights issues. Those are, if you're going to be part of the United States, civil rights. That was the argument back in the Civil War. That was the argument in the 60s. How much is a state's right? How much is a federal right? And I think that's part of education. We're going to be hit up with that with late-term abortions. Is it a state's right? Is it a federal authority? And that's the argument that's going in front of the Supreme Court. And I think that is the overall argument with education. How much should the federal government regulate versus support what the states are doing in education?
Is there an example of something that the feds are doing now that they should not be doing?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And those are just two. I've got like 5 or 6 things that are priority, but
do you want to run quickly through what else is on your list?
I think that another obvious one is criminal justice policing. I don't know what this looks like. There is a role in the United States where police agencies are local. It's not other countries where you have one police agency, which has sometimes been good in some countries, but if you go to other countries, it's been very tragic, from brown shirts to, it ends up being one police. And we have several federal police agencies. Don't know that we know all of them, but we also have state police agencies, and then counties and cities. And similar to education, there's a need for the community to be in charge of how that interacts. That's some of the issues I think we're dealing with, where police get blamed for some things, and really it's maybe a reflection of a deeper issue within the community and the elected officials, and the police are just the most visible part of that. But that's a pretty deep topic based on 28 years of law enforcement. So we have a need for the federal government to ensure that cities, states, and others are protecting constitutional rights. And my job as a local police officer was to protect and implement, for lack of a better word, both the state and the U.S. constitutions, from making sure people had freedom of speech, and at the same time were protected, making sure that people who were alleged to have committed a crime had due process, and we followed search and seizure law. That's implementing the Constitution. And we're in a crisis now. I don't think it's passed. I think and Portland's not the only example. In fact, there's other cities that are worse. But we're in a crisis that if we don't take the right steps to support versus dictate, I think we end up in a different type of a situation that long term could hurt us, with examples like of what have happened across the world with a single national police force.
Support rather than dictate to the police.
To the communities and to the right now, and I'm an advocate of best practice. So the bill we passed that talked about the mandating agents to become accredited was my bill, and we've been pushing that because the agencies I worked for were accredited, similar to hospitals and higher ed, and they go through a process of review every so often to ensure they're not only implementing best practice, but they're following best practice. Otherwise, the policy manual sits on the shelf, and what you get on the street is, well, this is the way we did it 20 years ago when I started, and this is the way we're doing it today. Well, that's not best practice. So I think the federal government can have a role in ensuring and pushing and research, collaborating data to help develop best practice. But to decide what Portland looks like versus Seattle or Beaverton or McMinnville, I don't think is the federal government's role.
Can you give me an example of a best practice that you don't think agencies have implemented in the last 5 years?
So I was surprised when Lou Frederick came to me, and Kevin Modika was former assistant chief. I went through the Portland State Hatfield College with Kevin, so I knew Kevin. I had assumed, because where I worked in Benton County, Corvallis, and Yamhill County, and McMinnville, every agency did psychological evaluations. And I found out that was not true. So Lou Frederick and I worked to get that passed, so that now it's law that in Oregon, every agency has to do a psychological evaluation of a police officer.
As part of getting hired?
As part of getting hired. My mind was blown that we didn't do that. Because in my experience in the agencies I worked in, is we did. Another is wellness programs, where not every agency has a wellness program. And that's critical, because it's no different than PTSD from the military, in that you can find just an ideal candidate to be a law enforcement officer, and after 10 years of vicarious trauma, they are no longer suitable because they've had no way to deal with everything that they're supposed to deal with, because that's the job. And so part of it's a culture within the agency, and part of it is implementing best practice. I mean, those are little things. Some of the other things that we actually, in some of our legislation that we passed, are best practice that agencies have been doing, but not throughout the state. So when you watch another officer commit a crime, it's a mandatory report. Seems pretty basic. Not every agency required it. Best practice in being accredited in both the accrediting bodies that I've been involved with, it was required. And I'm harping on accreditation because I was an assessor for the CALEA, which is the Center on Law Enforcement, the national accrediting body. I was an assessor for them for a few years. So I had a chance to see other agencies around the United States. And again, the federal government's role then, I think, is to support that effort, not to tell, unless you get into a violation like we've had in Portland, where they say, no, you're violating people's civil rights. We're going to come in and make sure that you're complying with our federal law and civil rights. But other than that, the federal government shouldn't be telling us how to do the job.
Let's do a quick round. Some of these.
Actually, there were two of my priorities that I didn't actually get to.
We'll come back to you in a second.
Okay.
So these are. Okay. One of them is a question we're asking most Republican primary contenders. One, and that is Joe Biden the legitimately elected president of the United States?
I'm happy to go first.
Go ahead.
Joe Biden's our president. He's been president for 18 months. So, yeah. Usually the question that goes along with that is fraud and everything else. And I would tell you that my life experience, my professional experience, tells me there is fraud in every part of our lives, and probably including elections. And I think our job is to always work to minimize fraud. Just like whether it's in elections, healthcare, anything else we do. Now, that may be a cynical cop approach. It's like, yeah, of course there's fraud. And there is. I don't know, and I would rather not dwell on what happened. I think we need to focus on how we move forward, how we ensure there is no fraud, or we're minimizing fraud, how we ensure computer systems are secure, which is an ongoing process. I mean, as soon as you secure a computer, somebody figures out how to hack it, then you need to secure it. Somebody figures out how to hack it. That is an ongoing process. And we need to be vigilant in doing that, just like fraud in healthcare. The FBI, most people don't know, one of their major jobs is to find fraud in Medicare. And that's what they do. If it's healthcare and in a private insurance, and that fraud, they don't. But if it's Medicare, because it's federal money, they do. And there are agents here in Portland at the office here that's what they do full time, is fraud in Medicare. There's fraud, unfortunately, in a lot of places. If you put something on market price, you're gonna. So my point is, we need to figure out what it looks like going forward. The basic question is, Joe Biden's my president. And I say my president because I'm part of the United States, and I think we need to look forward as to how we. We've had the hanging chads in Florida. We've had fraud back when Jefferson Davis was elected, or quote elected, and Congress had to choose. And then You know, we had two presidents for
It
a
seems
while.
to be getting, but it seems like there's less. I mean, if you look at the studies of this last election, there was vanishingly little fraud beyond, say, one-off cases where, like, Kevin McCarthy, you know, faked his address.
Yeah, but
it seems like the trend is our friend in terms of election fraud. I mean,
I
do
think you
you
could say
feel
that.
comfortable do you feel like it was a solid election that, you know, that Joe Biden won or that there is this question that election fraud maybe
I think the difficulty with the fraud argument is that a lot of it is very subjective in the media and allegations. And be it to my credit or deficit, I want to see the actual investigation because that's what I'm used to seeing. And I know there's investigations out there, and I know people
there's
have
a bunch.
discovered
I mean,
fraud. But I don't know that it actually changed the outcome of the election.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. I can't say that I believe it
So-
does or doesn't.
I'm going to ask you one more, and then we'll go to Angela with these questions. Do you believe climate change is impacting the fire seasons we're experiencing in the West?
I think I'd be foolish to say it doesn't have a role, but I don't think it's the major role. If that makes sense. I think when you combine our people are in the forest more. We've changed the way we manage the forests over the last 25 years, and then climate change. All those may together contribute. And you know, we saw people setting fires, which you know that may not be a part of climate change. How they burn may be part of that. You know, it's we've had big fires before, the Tillamook burn and others that just burned and burned and burned. So part of it, I think, is it's hard to argue that the climate's not changing. It's been changing since the world's been in existence with hot cycles and cold cycles. And that's not an excuse to not take care of the planet. That's not my way to get out to acknowledge that the climate changes and that we should not take care of our natural resources because we should. But I think it's more than just climate change that causes these forest fires.
Great. Angela, can we go to you on those questions? Is Biden the legitimately elected president of the United States?
Before we go to that, like I said, I had two other priorities.
I'm going to skip those for now. We can come back at the end. I'll give you a chance to talk about other priorities at the end. Can you answer those questions?
Sure. So is Joe Biden our president? Yes, he is our president. Do you want me to elaborate on the fraud question?
Sure, if you would care to. I asked, is he our legitimately elected president? And you answered a slightly different one, but okay.
So, there's 83% of Americans that believe that there was fraud in our last election, and
How many
I believe that
did
any
you
fraud.
say? 83, you
Sorry?
said?
Yes. Yeah. There was a recent poll a month or two ago that actually asked that question, and 83% of Americans agree that there was fraud in the last election, in the 2020 election. So. I believe any fraud is too much fraud, and that Americans need to be assured that our elections are accurately reflecting the views and the desires of the American people. And so I believe that we absolutely need to be investigating any example of fraud and making sure that that our elections, like I said, reflect the desires of the American people.
So was
every level.
Joe Biden legitimately elected our president? Yes or no?
Yes, because it was certified. The election was certified. So that means he is legitimately our president.
Okay, great. The other question was, do you believe climate change is impacting our the forest fires we're seeing in the West?
Yes.
Great. One thing that the paper definitely looks for in its endorsement is people who have the capacity to think independently. Is there any way in which you would highlight the ways that you are different than the Republican Party line? Angela?
So I was just thinking your question. So ways that I'm different than the Republican Party line. I would say that there are a number of issues that I would probably fall maybe in a little different category. So, for example, would be my thoughts on whether or not same-sex couples should be able to foster or adopt children. So I'm absolutely in favor of that. Research tells us that children need to have a loving home, and that there is no difference in a child's ability to be well-adjusted and to contribute to society or actually manage their own lives, regardless of who they're adopted by. We have so many unwanted children in this nation that I feel like regardless of where someone falls in regards to who their partner is, if they are a safe, welcoming home that's going to be loving to a child, then the child should have the opportunity to have that experience.
Great. Thank you for that example, Representative Noble.
Sure. I'm a Republican because I believe in smaller government, in that government should be large enough to do just what it's supposed to do, and then leave us alone. I don't believe we should regulate for the sake of regulation or tax for the sake of taxation. But there are other things, and I've demonstrated those actually. I'm pro-life, and I separated from my party when we voted on some changes to aggravated murder and capital punishment. And it's because I'm pro-life. I'm pro-life from the beginning of life, and I'm pro-life to the end of life. And I think we need to really evaluate when we allow government to take somebody's life, which is not a traditional view.
Catholic?
Pardon me?
Catholic?
Christian. So it's there have been other instances where I've been willing to vote what I believe. I've come across in the legislature and actually in law enforcement, there are moral issues. And that would be one for me. If I'm pro-life, then I'm pro-life, period. It's okay under these circumstances, but not under these other circumstances. And that's somebody who trained to be ready to take someone's life if I had to take a life. And fortunately never had that decision right in front of me. Close, but no. And so there are moral issues. Then there are other issues that may be ethical or decisions when you're making decisions to vote or how you believe a policy should play out. And I work in a district right now that is split 50-50 Republican. Now, most of the people registered to vote are unaffiliated, really similar to CD6. And so I've established that I'm going to represent the people. And it's done through the lens of small government and Republican Party, but I represent the people, period. They're my boss. No one else is my boss. And that was my vote on the aggravated murder, and there's been other votes like that.
To be fair to both of you, I think you've both demonstrated, even in this interview, an independent line of thinking. But I asked it because both of you provided interesting answers on that. Do you have any questions you want to ask?
I was just looking through your endorsements, Angela, and you have Build Back Basics in Education. Is that right? And I just was looking at their Facebook page, and one of the first things is it's got Ron DeSantis here rejecting dozens of math books with critical race theory. Is there critical race theory in math books? And if you were in Florida, would you vote for Ron DeSantis?
So so I have seen critical race theory, and actually there was a legislation that was passed here in Oregon that stated that we have to have equity and inclusion in every subject. Math is math. Math is one of our most objective subjects that we can have. And so if we're including, I do not believe that we need to include things like equity and inclusion in every single subject when there is something as like I said, objective as math. We can look at what a problem is, look at the numbers and just calculate the numbers. So when, and I gave you my view on critical race theory and how I believe it promotes segregation, which I think is harmful to our nation. And I think it's a slap in the face to everything that was worked towards during the civil rights movement.
But I mean, is there really a math book that, is math being perverted by critical race theory? And because that's what Ron DeSantis is saying.
So my answer to that would be yes. I have seen or heard of problems in even our high schools here where children are being told that they have to create entire systems based on whether or not a economy is equitable versus just focusing on the principles of math. I think it takes away from the academic excellence. We have half of our third graders that can't read. We have 50% of our graduating seniors that have to take remedial classes in math and reading and English before they can take 100 level college courses. So I believe that taking our focus off of the basics is extremely important, that we get those back to academic excellence so that, like I said earlier, our kids can compete at the national and international levels. And we've seen how this trend has moved us away from being able to promote children out of, into adulthood with sufficient academic rigor.
Yeah. So would you vote for Ron DeSantis and his approach to this if you were in Florida?
I would.
You'd vote for, okay.
Okay, and Anthony mentioned one, is there an endorsement you're most proud of getting?
I would say the endorsements I'm most proud of getting are at the school board level, where I have been an active advocate in removing politics from schools. I feel like at this point we need to, instead of trying to promote activism in our kids, I think we need to try and promote academic excellence.
Okay, and just from your conversation of critical race theory, you're kind of using equity and inclusion as synonymous with critical race theory. Am I hearing that right?
So those are the terms that have now been used to substitute for critical race theory because there's such a loaded political stance to the term critical race theory.
Okay.
Hey, just on your endorsements page, just FYI, Trevor DeHart, Newburgh School Board, you have a typo. It says SCHOLL board. It should be 2 O's and an L, but that's a typo.
Yes,
sorry, I'm a journalist. I noticed that stuff.
And as you know, most candidates are managing their own website, but yes, I'll make sure that that's taken care of.
Representative Noble, is there is there one endorsement you're most proud of receiving?
Actually, not just one. I'm very proud and honored to receive, the chiefs of the sheriffs and several DAs, and this one stands out. Some of the legislation we dealt with in Oregon at times pitted the line officers with the administration, and so having ORCOPS, which is a line officer organization, and the chiefs and the sheriffs all endorse me. I think I know I'm very proud of that. And so the other ones, and this gets back a little bit to the other question. I represent people. I've got 5 kids. I've got 4 adult kids, and having my children, even though they may have different political bents, still endorse me. And obviously, it's not on my page or anything else. It's probably the most important to me. This is not my identity. It's a passion. I love doing it right now, but it's not win at all costs. And that's probably not a good thing to say in an endorsement interview, but it's not. My career was law enforcement. This is my service, and I'll do it as long as I can.
I just remember a devastating attack ad of somebody's siblings from another state, so at least, you don't have that to face, for
Right,
sure.
right.
Do you have other questions?
Do you want to do our fun one?
I did.
How much time do we have?
We're probably, I don't know, I think we were scheduled for a half hour, so we're
Oh,
kind of
oh.
over, but why don't we do the fun one as the last question?
Yeah. Do you want to do it?
Sure. And Angela, I did promise you a little, let me
let's do that.
live up to the promise I gave you of, if you want to spend 2 minutes on any, like kind of closing remarks on why you're running here, we'd be open to that, and then we'll do a last fun question. Sorry to run long here.
Okay, so I think of the other two of my main priorities, one is our economy, the other is our national security. Having been an intelligence analyst in the Air Force, I have a lot of experience and training in the military in what can and should be happening through our intelligence agencies. The failures that we had with the withdrawal of Afghanistan, the intelligence failures that we've had related to the Russian-Ukraine situation, I think are extremely devastating. I think as a nation, we're going to be battling against our own equipment and against the intelligence data that was lost or handed over during the Afghan situation. I think we need to have someone in office that has an understanding of those pieces and can actually contribute to the committees that manage our intelligence and our DoD.
All right, thank you. And Representative Noble, do you want to give us any last thoughts on why?
Oh, yeah.
Why people should vote for you?
I think the issues, I know the issues. One of the things in deciding to run for CD6 is my experience in law enforcement of having to understand people, listen to both sides of the issue in order to de-escalate a situation out on the street, fits very well in the legislature in trying to understand how people view a problem. But I've been involved in the Judiciary Committee, Transportation Committee, Healthcare Committee, Human Services Committee, and those are all the same issues we're dealing with at the federal level. And how we provide services to our youth and our seniors and disability. How are we ever going to finally maybe make healthcare affordable and accessible? How do we build and maintain our transportation infrastructure and other infrastructure? And then criminal justice, and how do we actually implement constitutional values? And that's what I've been doing. We have some economic issues. And it's not limited to a particular party. Over the years, we've been just printing and spending based on whatever gets us the votes. And it's not just balancing the budget that's important, because Oregon has a balanced budget, and Oregon likes to just tax more and spend more. And so we do a lot of the same things in Oregon, where we'll have some great ideas in a bill, and then we'll throw some other things in there as pork, just like the federal government does. So it's not just a balanced budget, but it's really focusing on what people need and not just serving special interests for the sake of serving them. So they're beyond just what I've experienced. I also know there's some economic issues that I haven't been involved with the state legislators much. So as you can tell, I've learned how to be a politician, and I can talk for a long time. My apologies.
All right, so last question. We'll start with you, Representative. What stands out? Sometimes these are trick questions, but not this year. As the pandemic has eased, what stands out to you as a back to normal joy you've experienced?
I don't know that I've got back to normal. I think we're establishing a new normal in both family. Our family during the pandemic, our family, when everybody was 20. So, and we met with 20 of us. And we made it through just this last February before anybody got sick. But we're establishing a new normal. What does that look like? What does it look like interacting? One of the things I really enjoy, and I'm just going to pick on us here, the wearing of a mask is not a political statement, because that's what it became. The willingness to be vaccinated, it no longer needs to be a political statement. It's between me and my physician and no one else. And then it's my choice. It's a business's choice to have regulations on who comes in, and it's a customer's choice to come in. And there should be no shame in that one way or the other. I think looking forward to a new norm, I think that's important. We can't go back because part of that new norm is we still have, and will have for a while, supply chain issues. We have employment issues. There are a lot of people my age who were eligible for retirement who, I think partially because of the polarization over requirements in the workplace, said, the heck with it, time to retire. And so now we have, I don't think that's all of it, we have a workforce issue. We're going to have to look at what that looks like going forward. Yeah, there's a lot of work to do.
So the closest I'm going to extract from your answer, the joy you were talking about is kind of like the new normal of like there being freedom to decide on things outside of politics, like you mentioned, vaccine or.
Yeah, it never should have been a political issue.
Right.
And I think that's easy.
And you're seeing that. You said you're seeing that easing? Is that
yes.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be sure.
That my choice to wear a mask or not wear a mask is not based on a political ideology, and it never was. But that's the way our society was, not just in Oregon, but around the country.
Airplanes are going to be interesting.
I would like to imagine that reality. So thank you. Angela, is there a back to normal joy that you've experienced?
Absolutely, seeing people's faces again, seeing their smiles, and knowing that I can look at someone and they can look at me, and we can accurately interpret one another's intentions or feelings. There was a study that came out recently that talked about how wearing of the mask inhibited people's response to one another and their ability to accurately interpret another person's emotions. And so as a psychologist, obviously mental health is a huge issue for me. And so, through even prior to the pandemic, there was already some of the highest rates of, especially youth, anxiety, depression, and suicidality. But since then, we've had a number of pediatric societies and our Surgeon General that have come out and declared our mental health in our youth as a national crisis. And so, seeing us get back to that and people being able to interact on a level again that helps to develop relationships and to reduce isolation, I think is extremely important and has been, I think, a wonderful piece of us letting loose of the mask mandates.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and our endorsements will be out a week from today. Is today Wednesday?
Today's Thursday.
Oh, today's Thursday. A week from yesterday. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Great discussion.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.